right. I'm just going to set some things here so I can refer to them as I need to. It's great to be with you. I was telling Chance I've been to this campus once before. I had some friends that went here, and so way back when I was in college, I came to visit. But it's changed an awful lot since then. But wonderful place to be. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, I grew up in Boise, had an academic scholarship to the University of Utah, went there intending to go to medical school, and went on a mission for the church to California, and over the course of my mission decided that I didn't want the lifestyle of a doctor. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but I was very interested in the field of communication and how that applied to business. So I didn't know when I started at the University of Utah, but they have a world-recognized communication program, and I had an opportunity to get a degree in interpersonal and group communication while I was there. I thought that I would do business consulting and help companies that were going through mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And instead, after school, with the need to support a wife and a child that was on the way, I had an opportunity to apply for a job as a program director at a retirement community in Salt Lake. And it sounded like fun. I have a background in music. I played the piano, the organ, and the saxophone, and studied those in college as well. And I thought, gee, I could get paid to use some of the talents that I've been blessed to develop throughout my life, and to do some of my hobbies. They wanted to hire somebody that would teach educational programs to seniors. And I thought that sounded like fun. I was told I could teach anything that I wanted, as long as seniors were interested in it. And so I did a biography class. I did a class called How Things Work, where I basically took apart TVs and microwaves and other things and explained to 85-year-old women how they work. It was fun. I did a first-year college astronomy course. Basically took a class that I took in college and took all the materials and adapted it for the seniors. And I had a generous budget. I had a department of staff to manage, so I was getting managerial experience. I had enough money to hire Utah Symphony musicians to come several times a year and play for dances with little jazz combos. I was having a great time. And it didn't take very long before I realized that what I was doing was not only a lot of fun, but there was a future in it. I had the opportunity to work with some really great administrators during that period that served as mentors and provided opportunities for me to grow. And it wasn't too long before I had opportunities to become an executive director within the company, and I've just grown from there. So about 5 years ago, I had a call from a recruiter out of the blue, and long story short, I wound up going back home to Boise to run an Alzheimer's facility, and found out that I could refine a passion that I developed for working for seniors even further, because I decided that I really, really enjoy working with people who have Alzheimer's disease. Now, a lot of you will go into careers where you'll interact with people who have Alzheimer's disease. And so, as Chance and I talked about today's opportunity to speak to you, we decided that it would make a lot of sense to talk about Alzheimer's and to give you some basic information that might help you be a lot more successful if you ever interact with people that have the disease. From this point out, with that background in mind, I'd like to make sure that what we're doing is pretty interactive. So you can stop me anytime you want, you can ask questions, you can jump in and say, hey, could you clarify that a little bit more? So let's make this a little bit of a dialogue. But for starters, I'm going to throw out a question and see what kind of insight the group has. If somebody asked you to define the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia, what might you say? Anyone have an idea? Yes?
I think Alzheimer's is a more progressed form of dementia.
Okay,
like a further stage of
okay.
dementia, right?
That's one common thought about it. You'll hear that a lot. Any other ideas? Alzheimer's versus dementia.
Is one short-term memory, one long-term memory?
Okay, that's a good stab. Is one short-term memory, one long-term memory. Okay, let's dive into it. I don't ask the question to play, let's guess what the teacher's thinking. I don't like that. It's more to illustrate that there's a lot of ideas out there about Alzheimer's disease and about dementia, and there's also a lot of misunderstanding. And one of my goals today is to clear up some of that misunderstanding so that you walk away a little bit better educated about something that you're going to run across. I guarantee that almost everyone in the room at some point will have a friend, acquaintance, family member, somebody affected by Alzheimer's or some other type of dementia. And so it's critical that you know about it. Right now in the state of Idaho, there are 33,000 people roughly with Alzheimer's disease. And there are probably even some more that we don't know about because a lot of the cases haven't been diagnosed. So that's enough people to fill Bronco Stadium in Boise. Over the next 10 to 15 years, that number is expected to double in the state of Idaho. And part of that has to do with demographics, just the fact that we're living longer and the population of the state is aging. Dementia is a general term. And when we say someone has dementia, what we're saying is that they have a list of symptoms. And those symptoms include memory loss. And I don't mean forgetting where the car keys are or walking into a room and not knowing why you were there until you pause a minute and think, oh yeah. That's normal. And from about age 30 onward, that happens to people regularly. That's called age-associated cognitive decline. I'm talking about memory loss that really affects daily life. Things that interfere with a person's ability to function. It's not normal to forget the names of family members. It's not normal to forget what a common object is called. So if you are around someone who has those types of deficits, chances are they have dementia of one sort or another. So in addition to memory loss, symptoms can be things like trouble sequencing a task. Maybe the person knows in general what they want to do, but they can't figure out how to accomplish getting from point A to point B. Yes?
So maybe I'll touch upon this, but what are the key indicators that you look for to distinguish between two?
Key indicators to distinguish between...
Or like dementia and Alzheimer's, or Alzheimer's.
Okay. Let me finish tying into how Alzheimer's and dementia relate, and I think it'll answer your question. So, memory, trouble sequencing tasks, difficulty socializing in appropriate ways, difficulty with navigating through space, disorientation to time, trouble manipulating numbers. For example, a lot of people in relatively early stages of dementia cannot write out a check. They just can't figure out how to do something like that. There can also be changes in motor skills, changes in lots of other areas of a person's physical functioning. But when someone has significant memory loss and at least one other major symptom, we can say they have dementia. And you can think of dementia as an umbrella term. And you've all seen an umbrella. There are segments of an umbrella. And if you think of the dementia umbrella as consisting of a whole bunch of different diseases that make up it, then Alzheimer's disease is a roughly 70% chunk of the umbrella. So Alzheimer's disease is the major cause of dementia. When someone shows the symptoms that are called dementia, we can say, yeah, this person has dementia. What we're not saying is what's causing it. And there are two basic causes of dementia. There are primary dementias and there are secondary dementias. Primary dementias are things that actually attack the brain itself and cause it to deteriorate. And Alzheimer's disease is the biggest culprit. So Alzheimer's causes two big things to happen. One is that protein deposits build up in the brain. We call them beta amyloid plaques. And those plaques are like sticky deposits, and they disrupt the ability of one neuron to talk to another. It's as if I was going to hand Chance a note, a message that was critical for him. And as I went to hand it to him, something rushed in the way and prevented me from handing that off. That's kind of like what's happening with these beta amyloid plaques. That deposit in the brain interrupts the flow of neurotransmitters from one neuron to another. And so the message just doesn't get through. The other thing that happens with Alzheimer's disease is that neurons or brain cells themselves get twisted or tangled up. So someone with Alzheimer's disease has both tangles and plaques in the brain. And when brain cells get twisted up and misshapen, they die. The shape of a brain cell is essential to how it functions. And once it's twisted up, things don't work right, and the brain starts to, or those brain cells begin to die. There are lots of other things that cause primary dementia. Lewy body dementia, or Parkinson-related dementia. There's alcohol-induced dementia, Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, traumatic brain injuries. All these things will cause irreversible damage to the brain that results in symptoms called dementia. Secondary dementias are things that are reversible. They can include things like urinary tract infections, imbalances of vitamins and minerals in the body. If your potassium level's way off, you're going to be really confused, for example. If you're diabetic and your blood sugars go way off, either really high or really low, then you're going to show symptoms of dementia. Clinical depression will cause symptoms of dementia. And there are a host of other things, but those things are treatable. If someone has a urinary tract infection and they're elderly, most likely they're going to present with symptoms of confusion. They might get more agitated. They might be totally irrational in what they're doing. And when you treat the urinary tract infection, those symptoms go away. So, in general, secondary dementias you treat. Primary dementias you treat symptoms, but you can't restore what's lost. Yes?
Does it affect the whole entire brain or just parts of it?
Really good question. Does it affect the whole brain or just parts of it? Most primary dementias end up affecting the whole brain. They might start in different ways, however. For example, there's a type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia that affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain first, and then eventually it spreads elsewhere. There's a rarer form called posterior cortical atrophy that causes the occipital lobe at the back of the brain to start to shrink. Does anybody know what the occipital lobe does?
Vision?
Vision, yeah. So one of the first observable symptoms for people with PCA is that they have visual problems. They literally start to lose their vision. And it's often difficult to diagnose PCA, and it's underdiagnosed because it looks a lot like someone has macular degeneration, and that's really common with the elderly. But as PCA progresses, then it affects the rest of the brain, and so you see deficits everywhere else. Alzheimer's disease starts in the hippocampus. Does anybody know what that controls?
Is that like reason and judgment?
Reason and judgment have a lot to do with the frontal lobe, but what were you going to say?
Isn't that like a little
itty bitty little part of your brain that like controls hormones and stuff like that or something? There's something there's.
No.
I can't remember. Is it-
Well, there's pituitary gland and there's the amygdala that control emotions, but the hippocampus is kind of a horseshoe-shaped structure in the brain that has a lot to do with memory functioning. And when someone develops Alzheimer's disease, the first symptoms that you see tend to be with memory. And usually people toss off the first symptoms as just, they're getting old and this person's getting a little bit confused as they get older, but everything's fine. And sometimes families will be in denial for long periods of time because they don't want to believe that something's wrong with mom or dad's just not himself anymore. But as Alzheimer's disease progresses, it continues to devastate the hippocampus, and then it destroys every other part of the brain. Well, we all know that the brain controls everything about how the body functions. So that means people with Alzheimer's disease might start with memory deficits, but eventually they're going to lose reasoning and judgment. They're going to lose verbal skills, both in terms of their ability to speak and their ability to understand. They will lose the ability to execute fine motor skills, so that they can't write anymore, for example. They don't use silverware anymore. They eventually will lose gross motor skills. The easiest way to think of the progression is that those abilities gained from infancy to adulthood are lost in roughly the reverse order. And sometimes it's really fascinating how closely the pattern follows. Do any of you have children? A few of you. Okay. How old are they?
10
2,
months.
10 months, 10 months. Okay. Not old enough to be feeding themselves yet.
Not quite.
As they get older, you will find that almost universally, children first have to learn how to swallow solid food. So I'm sure you're seeing that or have been working through that. What happens when you first start to feed an infant solid food? They choke a little bit. And how much of the food actually goes down versus comes out?
Quite a bit.
You get used to protecting yourself, don't you? Because it's going to get messy. That's because they're learning how to swallow and what to do with all the mechanics of the mouth and the trachea and everything to deal with that food. As they get older, your children will get proficient at swallowing things. And then they'll start to reach out on their own to feed themselves. Next, they'll start to use a spoon. Then they'll use a fork. And when they get quite a bit older, then they'll figure out how to use a knife. I have 4 children. My 13-year-old is pretty good with the knife. My 10-year-old son, he thinks he's good at the knife, but he scares me. My 8-year-old daughter, she struggles. She kind of attacks with the knife. So it takes a while to get through those things and to learn those skills. It really takes us as humans years to be able to do it. Almost universally, people with Alzheimer's disease quit using the knife, and then they can't use the fork, and then they can't use the spoon, and then they eat with their fingers, and then pretty soon someone has to feed them, and then swallowing gets really difficult. And eventually, 2 major things happen that result in the death of a lot of people with Alzheimer's disease. One is that their body starts to not metabolize food the same way that it used to, so even if they're eating a lot, they might be shedding weight because the body can't use the nutrition. But second, they also are losing the ability to swallow, and it becomes not only difficult, but frightening to eat. And sometimes they just eventually shut down and refuse to eat, and they just won't anymore. And the reality is at that point, even if they were eating a lot, the body couldn't process the food. Alzheimer's disease is a terminal illness. A lot of people will die of secondary infections that are caused by things like aspiration pneumonia, urinary tract infections, and other things. But the disease itself will shut down enough of the brain that even if people don't have those other problems, eventually the brain won't be able to tell the vital organs how to function, and life will cease. So it's a devastating thing for families to go through. So any questions at this point about Alzheimer's disease versus dementia?
I guess one of my questions is, sometimes the discussion that happens like when someone has Alzheimer's, like, oh, they don't really understand anyways. Like, just kind of helping us understand their emotional state, like how much do they really understand even though they're in that, mental fog and disconnect and just kind of, and then also another question I had is, how close are they, what's the research doing today, how close are they to improving functionality with Alzheimer's?
Okay, two very good questions. Start with the second one. As far as research, current research knows an awful lot about how Alzheimer's disease progresses, about what's actually happening in the brain. There are new genetic markers being identified all the time. There's a lot of debate right now as to how strongly linked to genetics Alzheimer's disease is. For a long time, there's been a belief that only early onset Alzheimer's, which would be cases that cause symptoms to become apparent prior to age 65, that only those cases would have a strong genetic component. That the single greatest risk factor for normal onset Alzheimer's is age. And that your risk of developing Alzheimer's from age 80 onward goes up about 10% every 5 years. Research still does not understand what starts Alzheimer's. We know it has something to do with aging. But there are a lot of different theories out there as far as environmental factors, lifestyle factors. There's a lot of correlation between diabetes and Alzheimer's. If you're a diabetic, your risk of developing Alzheimer's is twice the rest of the population. But we don't understand exactly how all that plays out. So there's a lot of work to be done to find out more. Researchers think that we're about 10 years away from the first truly disease-altering drugs. Not drugs that would prevent it, but drugs that could severely slow the process of it. I had a question here and then back here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, before you took this job, how much did you know about Alzheimer's? Did you still know as much as you do right now, or have you studied it personally?
Good question.
Sorry, that's a little
I
off
actually
topic.
wrote a paper in high school about Alzheimer's disease because I was interested in it then. And I had a theory back then about what caused it, and it's been proven wrong, but I was thinking about it. I've learned a ton since then. I've gone to lots of seminars, I've read books, I've done a lot of research, and I've had a lot of practical hands-on experience with it over the last 14 years.
Okay, because you just know so much.
Well, it's so much of what you learn. It's like I've got a brother that does neurosurgery, and he said, yeah, you learn a lot in medical school, but you really learn to do your job by practicing, by being on the job.
So this is just, I'm kind of ignorant as far as it goes, but would you say one of the main reasons for the growth in number of Alzheimer's patients or people who are developing it is because of advances in modern medicine? People are living to such older ages?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The average age at death in 1900 was, it's either 46 or 48, right in that range. And the normal cause of death in 1900 was either an illness that was acute and sudden, and somebody got influenza and they died, or pneumonia and they died, or it was accidental death. There were lots and lots of farm accidents in 1900 that claimed lives. And now we live so much longer that the risk factors are multiplied pretty dramatically. Now, Chance asked a second question that I didn't get to. His question was, how much do people with dementia understand? How much do they take out of an interaction? And the answer really has a lot to do with how advanced the disease is. Someone with really early stages of Alzheimer's disease will look and sound a whole lot like we do. And they'll understand most things. They'll struggle to remember, but in the moment they understand. Someone in advanced stages of Alzheimer's disease can only understand 5 to 7 word chunks at a time. But it's really critical to always treat them as people and to approach them as a person and not a task. You get a lot further when you approach them as people, and you have to assume that they understand what you're saying. I'm appalled by how often doctors who receive very little training in how to do dementia care, none of the practical nuts and bolts of how to communicate with people who have dementia. Frequently, doctors will talk about an affected person in front of them as if they weren't there. So they'll talk to their spouse and say, yeah, he can't do this, and he can't do that, and he's totally incontinent, and meanwhile, this person is sitting right there. And not only is it a dignity issue, but they really can't understand a lot of what's being said. And it causes a lot of agitation, and it's upsetting. You have a question.
Yeah, well, to kind of comprehend or understand just what stage they're at, what would be your recommendations for that, for somebody that has dementia? Because, I mean, you can't approach it the same way with Alzheimer's, because kind of like going back to your analogy, your kids start out using a spoon, then they work to a fork and then a knife. And then with Alzheimer's, they go from a knife to a fork and then to a spoon, where they're feeding themselves and then they can't even take in. So you can't approach it the same way, right?
There are some general things that you can use when you approach people with dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, which is also super common, caused by strokes or chronic high blood pressure or mini strokes, or any of the other types of dementia. There are some general things that you can do for everybody. And all of this centers in understanding how the affected person sees the world. So we start with general things and then we refine it on an individual level. You have to spend time with the person and get an understanding of what they can and can't do and how they see the world. And I'll give you a few practical examples of that. But let's talk for just a minute about the general approach, because I think this will help anybody. People with dementia really struggle to make sense of the world based on all the stimulus that's coming their way. And they can't filter through a lot of what's happening. So if you're saying too much, if you're moving too fast, if there's too much going on, even if there's too much light or too much noise, you're going to overstimulate them and it will be very difficult for them to focus. And so one of the first things that you need to do is pay attention to the environment and just simplify things. But because they're struggling to process what they're taking in, they're having a hard time remembering what you just said, they may be struggling to process the words that they are hearing. They're also paying a lot of attention to what they experience non-verbally through other channels of communication. So imagine, and some of you have served missions, so you've been through this example I'm going to throw out. Imagine that you're all in a foreign country, you speak a little bit of the language, but you are by no means proficient, and so you're catching just a few words here and there. Who's been in that situation? Okay. Now I don't know where you all served missions to experience that, but when you were out there just getting immersed in the culture and first learning, did you notice that you paid a lot of attention to facial expression and the tone of voice and body language so that you could figure out, are they excited to be talking to us or not? And you were able to start making sense of the world based on what you saw and observed. And people with dementia have to do the same thing. And so much of what you see in them becomes a mirror of what they're taking in. If they're getting agitated, chances are it's because you or something else in the environment is provoking it. You're doing something that's causing them to be frightened or feel like they need to lash out. So if I walk up to Chance and I'm standing here, what does he have to do? He has to look up to see me, because if he wants to make sense of what's happening non-verbally, he's got to see my face. And what am I communicating about who's in charge? I'm standing, he's sitting. What does that non-verbally say?
You're over him, like you have power.
I'm over him, I have power. Exactly right. So if Chance had dementia, this would be a very intimidating thing. Even for people without dementia, it's a little intimidating when someone walks up like that. That's why teachers walk up when kids are talking in class. You walk up and they kind of cower a little bit. Now, what if I walked up like this? Now who's in charge? Chance. Exactly. And he can see my face very directly, so it's easy for him to make sense of things non-verbally. And everything about that communicates, I'm safe, I'm not threatening, and you're in charge. That's the standard way to approach someone with dementia. The other thing to do is to extend your hand and shake their hand, because all around the world, people understand that when we make physical contact like that, we're communicating friendship or warmth or affection, or that this is a safe interaction. And so if you walk up and say something simple like, well, hi there, you must be Chance. I'm Eric. I'm your helper. Notice I gave him a really simple explanation of who I was and why I was there. I'm your helper. That's a word a lot of people understand. To understand why this is so important, I want you to imagine that you're sitting in your home, it's evening, you're by yourself, maybe you're reading a textbook for your favorite class, because you can't get enough of it, and in bursts a complete stranger, and just starts kind of going through things in your space. What are you going to do? Okay, you're going to pull out your sidearm. What else are you going to do? So the rest of you.
I think you're an intruder.
Okay, you're going to think it's an intruder. You might hide, you might try to call the police, you might scream, you might do a whole lot of different things. People with dementia don't have an ability to understand someone that's new in their environment. When the hippocampus is devastated, they have no ability to remember new things. There's a big crater in their brain where the tissue that used to allow the person to remember new things resided. And so once that's gone, it's as if Chance was my hippocampus, and what's your name? Jackie. Okay, so suppose I meet Jackie, and mentally, my brain's trying to write a note. Okay, her name's Jackie, and I've learned this about her, and she has black hair, and I met her at BYU, Idaho, and I start writing down these notes of what I now know about Jackie. If Chance was my hippocampus, and my brain tried to give him that note, say, okay, hold on to this one, it would be as if Chance just chucked the paper away. It's gone. No memory of it. Well, if that's the experience of people with Alzheimer's disease, then if I walk into their space and they don't have a whole lot of history with me, then I'm a total stranger. And if I don't take time to recognize that I'm a total stranger and to do something to help them feel comfortable in the moment, then I'm going to be in real trouble, because in their minds, I'm an intruder and I'm scary.
So what are the first memories that get lost? Are those the ones that like are the most recent, Or are they the ones, like, for example, if they forget names, is it usually the people that they met most recently, or is it usually more like the people that they have the least amount of time with, like overall throughout their lifetime? Or like would they remember somebody from their childhood more than perhaps like their spouse, even though they remember their spouse?
Good question. There are different kinds of memory. There's short-term memory, there's long-term memory, there's procedural memory. In general, people with Alzheimer's and most other types of primary dementia lose short-term memory first, so they wouldn't remember interactions they just had. They might get bits and pieces of things. Sometimes things will stick, but they won't be accurate at remembering those things. But a common myth about Alzheimer's is that they only lose short-term memory. Truth is, they also lose long-term memory. And long-term memory can be thought of like an onion, where the earliest memories in life are the core of the onion, and every successive memory forms the new outer layer. And in general, when people start losing long-term memory, it's like peeling away layers of the onion. So they might not remember the last 6 to 12 months very well. And then you peel away another layer, and pretty soon they're living a decade in the past. Then you peel away some more, and you keep that process going, and pretty soon you're dealing with someone who thinks that they are much younger than they are, who thinks that their spouse is much younger than he or she is, who thinks that they're doing the things that they were doing much earlier in life. That's why people with Alzheimer's go around looking for their parents, or why they don't recognize their spouse. It's not that they don't know they got married in most cases. It's that in their mind, their working memory, that whatever the outer layer of the onion is, their working memory says that person is 25 and we're in college, and so this old person sitting in front of them can't possibly be their spouse. You combine the fact that their vision changes dramatically, and the person doesn't look the same to them. And so, how does knowing that affect the way that we interact with them? Well, it's huge. If you know that someone's living in the past, then you're going to approach them very differently. Suppose we got to 3 o'clock and you all stood up and started to go, and you found the doors were locked. And I went to the door and I said, oh, no, you can't go anywhere. It's not safe. You can't leave. You all would be going, but I have to get to class. Or my wife's expecting me. I promised her I'd be home. Or something else. I got a job to go to. And you'd start to panic. And no matter how much I said, no, this is where we're going to be, and I've got a nice place for you to stay, and everything will be fine. Let's just sit down and talk a little bit more. You'd be going, no way, I'm leaving. Well, that's how people with dementia respond to the world, because they're living in the past and they think other things are supposed to be happening. And so when someone says, affected person, I gotta go home, honey. I just have to go home. And you're responding and saying, well, this is your home now, and I promise everything is safe, and it's a nice place, isn't it? And we're really good to you here. They're going, this isn't my home, what are you talking about? Because they don't remember that how long they've been there. They don't know where they are. In their mind, home is someplace way in the past. So if you know that, how might you approach them differently? What could you say that would make sense? Any ideas?
Pull out the notebook.
You could
Pull out the notebook.
Could you say something like, okay, well, we'll go home a little bit later, let me show you this, and like try to distract them, or
Yeah.
try to like just roll with it?
You got to give them a reason to stay just a little bit longer. And that reason can be different for different people. I have a resident named Thelma who's lived with us for over 4 years now. And every day for 4 years at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Thelma gets a little antsy because she believes that her husband Thurman has to come pick her up. And she has to get home because she's got to get dinner ready for Thurman. Well, Thurman's been dead for 23 years. And we're not going to tell her that he died 23 years ago, because she doesn't remember any of that. And she wouldn't believe it if we told her. She'd say, oh no, you must be mistaken. It would be the same as if I told you you couldn't leave here, because in your mind, you know exactly what you're doing and why. So instead, we have to act surprised and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you. Thurman called. He's been tied up on his sales route in Eugene, and he has to stay an extra day. And he asked if you could stay another night with us. And I told him it'd be fine. And you know what Thelma says? 99.9% of the time? Well, I am so glad I ran into you. Are you sure he's okay and everything's fine? Yep, everything's just fine. Well, how will I pay for it? Oh, he paid in advance. He took care of all of it. Well, that is just like him. He's the nicest man. And then everything's fine. And once you fill the need, it's a lot of family members say, my gosh, you're lying to them. No, you're giving them something that would have been absolutely true, and it's critical that it's something that would have been absolutely true in the moment that they are living in. So we have to time travel with them. We have to go in the past and give them what would have made sense. Yes?
So 2 questions. Do you kind of avoid mirrors for people that are that way, where they think they are young, so do you kind of keep them away from that, or do you just...
Interesting question. One of the first things to look at when families come to me and say, well, he's hallucinating and he's terrified because there's someone in the apartment. I'll go to their home or to the, I do a lot of consulting where I'll go to regular assisted living facilities that aren't doing memory care, having problems with someone, and they're thinking, oh, we've got to get them loaded up on medications because they're hallucinating. And I'll walk in and see this mirror, and I'll just kind of casually observe, and every time he goes by the mirror, it's, who is that? Or I've watched people go up to the mirror and say, come on, come with me, come on. And yeah, their visual processing is way off, and mirrors are a huge problem.
So second thing, just really quick, you're a music guy, so
yeah.
How have you seen music and memory? I'm really curious about that, because I've heard these stories about people forgetting everything, but yet they hear a song and it brings back time.
Music is huge. Music is tied to memory. We can hear a song and instantly be transported back into our childhood when we were familiar with that song. And the part of the brain that understands and remembers those kinds of memories and that processes music is one of the last to be affected by Alzheimer's disease. So the ability to understand and to get something out of music stays with the person a lot longer. Now, really, most of the brain is activated with music. But there are specific centers that stay intact for a long, long time. And literally, all the time, almost every day in my work, I find people who can't hardly put 2 or 3 words together, but they can sing a whole song with me.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Or a lady, I've got a lady right now who used to be able to sing all the words, and she can't get the words out anymore, but the words are scrambled. They're not real words, they're a word salad. But she gets the melody right, or she can whistle the melody to simple songs that she knew when she was a little girl. So that's huge. Did you have a question or something?
I was just going to make that comment too. Is music tied to one of the only things that activates the whole brain?
Yes. Yes, it is.
I was just curious, so my grandpa, his mom had really severe Alzheimer's, and he started showing some small things, like he couldn't remember how to turn the thermostat down, just like weird little things like that. But is it common for them to be some days just really quiet, not talk a lot, and then other days just ramble and just go through memories and go and just non-stop talking? So how do you know what stage they're in, if they're fine certain days and just kind of like the in and out?
Everyone's going to have good days and bad days. The more fatigued we are, the lower we function. If someone's dehydrated, they don't function as well. And really the way to sift through all that is to study a person over time to do different types of cognitive testing and find out what they're really capable of, to talk to those who are around them frequently and to kind of piece together what the normal week looks like for them, and then you start to get an idea. Is there another question back here?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm just trying to figure out how to word it. When I was 3 or 4, my grandma had dementia, and she would be successful in leaving the facility where she was, and they would have to bring her back. What suggestion would you have for somebody, like, to bring a person back who was successful in leaving the?
Well, if someone has wandered, first of all, 6 out of 10 people with dementia will wander at some point, and that's why we have secured facilities. And going into healthcare professions, you should know that there is a wide variety of what's available out there. And just because some place says they do dementia care doesn't mean that they really do. For a lot of places, it means they have people with dementia residing there. But in an actual memory care community, the doors are locked. They cannot open them themselves. Most places use a key card system as opposed to a keypad because actually right here in Idaho, probably, I think it's been about 15 years ago, there was a retired music teacher who heard the tones on the keypad, and he went and he played that song, got out and froze to death. So there are good reasons to have secured facilities. So number one, get them in the right place so that they're much less able to wander. But if someone has wandered and they're out there on the street, then you have to realize they're living in the moment, and you can totally derail things with the right approach. And if it were me, I would just walk up and say, "Well, George, fancy meeting you here. What brings you this way?" And I just start walking with them and just start talking, and then you just gradually redirect back to where they were and go from there. Yeah, it's an art. It's not a science. There's a lot of improvisation. You have to be an actor. It's actually tons and tons of fun. When I go through my facility every morning and I visit with everybody, to one lady, she thinks I'm a newscaster because she's come to my news discussion group so many different times she thinks I'm on television. Well, that's kind of a trip and it's fun. Well, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be on news. Well, I took some time to just come and see. Oh, aren't you sweet? And then I turn around to the next person, I'm their son. The next person, I'm their doctor. The next person, they can't figure out, the hotel manager or whatever. That's fun. That's a lot of fun. One of the things that getting caught up in the discussion of dementia hasn't led to is a discussion of how to get involved in these types of careers. How do you go into long-term care administration, whether it's in assisted living or memory care, which would be a subset of assisted living, or skilled nursing facilities. Right now, some of the things that you all can be doing, in addition to your formal education, would be doing internships, volunteering, spending time around communities, networking. I get calls all the time from students saying, "Hey, tell me more about what you do and how you got into it." And that helps me get to know those students. And then when they're out looking for work, if they call me, "Hey, do you know any places that are hiring?" Well, yeah, I'm on the board of directors of the Idaho Healthcare Association, so I'm connected with people throughout the state that run different facilities. You also often have to be willing to start at a job that's not the administrator. I'm truly grateful that I started as a program director, because I got to know things in a much different way, and I have a totally different perspective than I would have if I had just walked in and taken over management of the ship. Do you have any other questions right now related to kind of how to break into it and how that would work?
I mean, from your experience, how long would you suggest someone like ourselves to spend in I wouldn't call them lower positions, but positions outside of management where you're learning to where you should feel somewhat comfortable managing. I guess it might depend on each person, but just kind of general sense, how long you'd suggest that we gain that experience before we jump right in?
I'd say a minimum of a year or two before you'd have enough to really understand how things work. Yeah. Obviously, it will be different for different people though. And do your homework. Really look at the company that you're applying for. There are lots, one of the problems in the industry is that there are a lot of companies that absolutely churn and burn employees. And some companies are very driven by occupancy, and they'll bring in administrators and say, you've got 6 months to move in 25 people and get us back up to 95% occupied, and if you don't, you're gone. Well, the thing that drives occupancy is stability in a community. It's taking really good care of your residents. It's having a great relationship with families so that they refer people. In other words, so that everything is running so smoothly that everybody else that interacts with your business becomes a referral source for you. They are your marketers. I don't have a marketer at my facility. I handle all that personally. But I don't have to be out spending a ton of time begging people to come because we have a good reputation and it sells itself. And so we've had a waiting list for the last 3 years. But that doesn't happen in 6 months' time. It happens over a much longer period. And if a facility has a history of, let's say they've had 10 administrators in the last 2 years, then chances are upper management's the problem. They want something that's unreasonable. And I've seen lots and lots of recent graduates get sucked into the idea of, wow, my first job, great salary, things look really good, and I'm different than all those other people that didn't make it. And guess what? You're not. There's, you may be long-term, but the company's not going to give you time to blossom because everybody else in the community knows that that facility churns and burns people. And until you've been there long enough to prove that you've gotten over the hump and that things are different, they're not going to refer to you. So just don't go work for them.
Learn all those inner intricacies because sometimes companies, they put on the front, it's kind of hard to know exactly. And then another question I had is, how big is your company? I know you have one in Portland and then Boise. Is there other?
We have 3 other facilities. It's privately owned by 2 men that have their own company. Yeah. You find out those things by asking the right questions. If it's a good company to work for, they will spend as much time letting you find out about them as they'll spend finding out about you. It's kind of like a marriage. And imagine you went out, you're in the dating process, and everybody that you dated wasn't allowed to speak back. You did all the talking. They answered basic questions, but they never got to ask you any questions. That's a recipe for disastrous marriages. And the same is true in the business arena. If you don't take time to interview your prospective employer and ask questions like, why is it that you're looking to hire right now? What led to needing to hire somebody? How many people have been in this position in the last 2 years? What's the turnover rate for your staff? What are some of the problems that you have in this facility that I would be expected to fix? If you're not asking questions like that, then you really don't know what you're getting into, and it could be a disaster. Any other questions? I want to leave a minute to scarf down a brownie, I suppose. Anything else? Yes, Chan.
Can we, for those that want to talk to you after, could we meet with you in the hall for a couple minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem. Well, I always give my staff a quote of the day. It's, I think, uplifting, it's fun, and it makes us think. And so I want to leave you with a quote of the day. This is a quote from Shakespeare from the play Julius Caesar. And Shakespeare said, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Amid it all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures." So you all are on a full sea right now, and you have the opportunity to take the current, and it's going to be different for each of you. The most important thing that you can do, and it's wonderful that we're at a place where we can say this, the most important thing you can do is to live worthy of the guidance of the Holy Ghost in your life. And if you will do that, your Father in heaven will help you end up in the right place, and He'll help you know what to do. I would not be where I am without that kind of guidance in my life. So if there's anything that you remember from this, remember to have the Spirit with you, and that'll help you get where you need to be. Well, thanks for your time today. It's great to be with you.